So Florida passes common sense legislation to prevent grooming within our elementary schools, and Hollywood has a real problem with it. But it's not just Hollywood. It's actually various teachers unions and school boards all over the country. We're going to be talking about that and more, and I'm just going to give you a warning right up front. If you're listening to this with your kids in the car, your kids in the house, you're either going to want your kids to go into the other room or wait till you get home, because we're going to go over some graphic stuff. But the bottom line is you need to know what's going on within your kids' public school. All that and more coming up on this episode of Making the Argument, where we make the arguments to defend a free society. Okay, so Florida passes what I affectionately refer to as an anti-grooming bill, which is essentially to say that there are certain topics and subject matter that may not be appropriate for your kindergartner or your second grader. So discussions about sex or discussions about all this, gender identity and things like that. They're essentially saying, look, just don't talk about it within your public schools with kids that young. There's no reason to do it. And of course, the Democrats then came out and said, well, this is the Don't Say Gay bill. Now, what's interesting is that nowhere in the bill did it say that. And if you've been paying attention, you've probably already heard this. But here's what I want you to understand about this legislation that I think is so important. It's the fact that Hollywood, Disney, teachers unions, school boards, they came out so hard against this and had to deliberately mischaracterize what the bill did in order to generate a particular reaction. So here's what I'm willing to bet. I'm willing to bet if somebody came up to you and said, hey, look, we're going to pass a law that says when it comes to discussing sex, not just homosexual sex or bisexual, whatever, just sex in general. We're just going to say that, look, third grade and below, it's not an appropriate place for this to be talked about. And so we're just going to instruct our teachers that, look, these are not questions for you to tackle. These are questions that are best handled by parents. Or if there's an issue, you can, recommend, you can call, like, for instance, if a child brings up something that maybe suggests that they might have been abused or whatnot, obviously you can still, notify authorities and whatnot. But just as a general course, this is not what we're going to focus on, third grade and below. We're just not going to do it. It's not appropriate there. I'm willing to bet most people would say, okay, yeah, that seems fairly reasonable. But the left comes out and they mischaracterize it as the Don't Say Gay bill, even though that appears nowhere in the legislation. They call it the Don't Say Gay bill. And they say, well, that under this legislation, if a student had questions about their gay parents, the teacher wouldn't be able to talk with them about it. Okay, again, I think that's a ridiculous interpretation. But what I really want to focus on is this whole idea of the Don't Say Gay bill combined with what they did next, not just in Hollywood, but some schools were actually holding like pride parades within an elementary school, which, oh, by the way, parents are not allowed to show up to. The reason why they did this is because they're trying to get people that might have a potential issue with this or might have a potential problem with this to feel embarrassed and ashamed. And there's this quote by Theodore Dalrymple, who that's a pen name for a doctor, and he's worked as a psychiatrist within the British National Health Service. He worked within the prison system. He actually did some work in sub-Saharan Africa. And he has this quote, and it's not perfect, but this is generally what it is. He essentially said that the more he studied propaganda, the more that he realized that it was not designed to inform. And so that therefore it wasn't designed to inform, it was designed to humiliate or intimidate, and therefore the less it corresponded with reality, the more useful it was. And he went on to talk about how when people get used to saying things that they know are obviously untrue, it has this degrading moral effect on society. And he ends it with basically saying that a society of emasculated liars is easy to control. And the reason why I'm focusing on this particular point, it's not just what was in the legislation. It's not just, the potential issues that people could have had with it. It's this idea that the propaganda attempt was made in order to suggest that the only possible way you could agree with this legislation is that if you were some sort of horrible, homophobic, transphobic person, right? You're just a bad person that wants to pick on marginalized groups, and that's the only reason why you could have had any problem with that. And then they decided to mock you and make you feel stupid and silly by calling it the Don't Say Gay bill. And then what do? Well, Hollywood just obediently got on board and decided to do this. Disney obediently got on board and decided to do this. The problem is that now you're messing with someone like Governor Ron DeSantis, who's not going to take that lane down. And you have a number of other groups out there that have become far more prominent, whether it's Joe Rogan, whether it's Jordan Peterson, whether it's others, where now the media can't just simply ignore them, or you can't just ban them all. They have a platform to actually talk about what was going on. In addition to that, you now have millions of people that are on social media who are actually following this, reading the bill and saying, wait a second, there's something wrong with the way this is being depicted within the media. And since, MSNBC is not the way that most people get their news anymore, the other side of this was able to get out. But what I find interesting is the number of people that were really just coming out hardcore against this. Places like Hollywood, which last time I checked, and the Oscars provided a perfect example of this, not exactly the area where I would recommend we get our sexual norms from. I mean, when you've got producers going to jail for sexual harassment and sexual assault, when you've got this culture which kind of makes a joke out of the whole casting couch and how if you're a young woman that wants to make it in Hollywood, you better be prepared to sleep with some fat executive that pretty much determines whether or not you're going to have a future in the place. When you're talking about the obvious pedophilia problem that we see, and we saw this with Kevin Spacey and others, they're the ones now lecturing us on what is appropriate to teach our children at third grade. And then the Democratic Party is just dutifully getting in line and saying, no, absolutely, yeah, this is horrible. Now, in case you thought it was just Hollywood, because I think all of us have been kind of, numb to the whole idea of, we realize Hollywood is kind of idiotic. I want to talk about this one site. It's called Libs of TikTok. And I love this site because what they do, you would think this was a parody account. It's not. What they do is they actually just take they take liberals on TikTok that have posted these various videos, and you would be shocked at how many of them are teachers. And all they do is repost it. They put it on Twitter, they put it on TikTok, and they just show you what the libs of TikTok, what liberals on TikTok are saying about various things. And they also show you what's actually going on in some of our schools. Like, so for instance, in Illinois, it's policy out there that children as young as 9 can be taught by their teacher about masturbation and gender transition. 9 years old. In Virginia, we had this debate all over again in Virginia. We said that, look, if there's going to be material for students and the lesson plan that is sexually explicit, and we used a specific code section with Virginia, if it's sexually explicit, we want you to give parents notification of this and be able to provide an alternative assignment. And we got accused of being book burners. We got accused of wanting to ban books. And we pointed out, nothing in this legislation bans books. We just say you got to let parents know. And if the parent's not comfortable with the particular book, then give them an alternative assignment. Now you're engaging in soft censorship because teachers aren't going to want to go through the extra trouble of finding a different book, so they're just not going to use that book. Oh, the horror. The horror that we might have a teacher that says, you know what, I was going to use this book, but it contains a lot of sexually explicit material, so now I'm going to use another book. Oh my, how will our education system ever survive under such a burden? And I pointed out when we were having this entire floor debate, I said, you know what, look, there's a simple alternative to this. We could have more school choice. And then if you want to send your kids to a school where they don't mind this sort of material, you can. And if somebody else wants to send their kid to a school where they don't use this sort of material, they can. But no, that's not good enough. And we're going to get into more of that later. But in case you thought that was as worse as it gets, no. In Texas, you had a parent get up and actually read, which was pretty pornographic material, which was available in the school library. Now, they came later and said, well, we ordered the wrong book. Okay, but it's still there. Are you going to remove it? And just so we hammer this point up a little more, in Westchester area school district, they had another book, and this was on Libs of TikTok. You can actually go and see it. And what it did is it showed a picture of 2 boys engaging in oral sex. This was in the school library. I think the book was called Gender Queer. And when they brought it up to the school board's attention, the school board essentially said that, well, this isn't pornographic. It may have some explicit material, but it's not pornographic. Can someone please tell me, how did we get to the point where we have pictures of 2 boys having oral sex available in the school library, where we have sexually explicit materials, where we're already dealing with the over-sexualization of our children in schools, and when parents say, we think this is too much, the response from the left, the almost unified response from the left, Not just talking about, the far extreme in Hollywood, but Disney. And essentially every Democrat politician steps forward and says, no, this isn't a problem. This pornographic material is not a problem. Teaching your third grader about masturbation is not the problem. No, you as a parent being upset or concerned with this, that's the problem. How bold is that? Think about this for just a second. That's incredible to me. That we're at a point where they can not only ensure this happens, they can push for it, advocate for it, and then make the rest of us feel like there's something wrong with us because we're uncomfortable with it. They can have the full ability to teach their children this way, but they demand the authority to teach your children this way. They raise more concern over being able to push this sort of sexual conversation with your third grader than they did the learning loss over the last couple of years when public schools shut down as a result of COVID.